Light guns and horror themes go together like fish and chips. The light gun provides for tense, exciting gameplay, while the horror themes deliver a thrilling backdrop on which to accentuate the action. Games like Carnival, The House of the Dead, and Alien 3: The Gun provided incredible experiences. The arcades were usually the best place to find light gun games, as the hardware allowed for the best possible production values. Ports to home consoles did happen, but often required serious cuts to the visuals and overall experience. Laser Ghost was an interesting example of a light gun game whose arcade version was very different to the one that made it to the home console. But were Sega's efforts to rebuild the game for the lesser hardware worthwhile? The arcade version of Laser Ghost was released in 1990, allowing for 3 players to join forces to keep the armies of the undead at bay. Taking obvious inspiration from Ghostbusters, it made for a fun title that would not have felt out of place in arcades of the era. There is nothing particularly sophisticated about the game. You travel through 5 stages as various poltergeists attack you head-on. Up to 3 players can tackle the ghosts at one time, allowing for some serious screen-filling action. The game looks fairly nice, balancing out the cartoonish vibes with enough spookiness to keep things interesting. Overall, not a bad light gun game if you manage to find a cabinet in the arcades, especially with a few friends in tow. The home port is where this story gets interesting. Laser Ghost was released for the Master System in 1991, and, aside from the name and the general concept, was basically a completely new game. The storyline, gameplay perspective, and atmosphere were totally different, to the point where calling it a port is not really accurate. This time, you are the sole protector of a girl named Catherine. Demonic entities have stolen her soul, so you need to help her break free from the basement of the manor where she is being held, then travel to Ghost City to get it back. The obvious change here is to the gameplay. This is now a single-player game featuring a side-scrolling perspective. Rather than enemies attacking the player, instead they now seek to attack Catherine. It's your job to provide covering fire for her as she makes her way through the various environments. As expected, the game's visuals are nowhere near as detailed as the arcade, but the Master System version also features a completely different art style. Whereas the arcade version was cartoony and fun, Laser Ghost on the home console often verges on the horrific, evoking similar vibes to games like Castlevania. This looks quite nice in some areas, such as the graveyards with the pitch-black night sky. Other times it can look a little too busy in comparison. The boss fights are highlights, with the big sprites really bringing out the monster movie feel that the game is going for. The minimalism of the graphics also leaves a bit more to the imagination, which actually makes the game a little bit more scary. Gameplay-wise, it's definitely not as smooth as the arcade, though it's no worse than most other light gun games were on the home consoles of the era. You can use either a light phaser or a standard controller. If possible, use the light phaser. The controller is just too slow to move a cursor around the screen and is difficult to aim with any precision at all. You don't need to reload, so you'll often find yourself preemptively shooting one side of the screen just in case any enemies suddenly appear. They move quickly, so it can be frustratingly difficult to keep Catherine safe at the best of times. Was it a good idea to rebuild the game for the Master System? Well, yes, in theory. There was no way it was ever going to manage a decent conversion of the arcade game. Unfortunately, the home version just isn't that special. It's no worse than the majority of the other light gun games on the 8-bit consoles, and has some interesting ideas, but is really just a temporary distraction at best. It's a decent single-night game for a retro-themed Halloween party then. At least, until you break out House of the Dead 2.